Welcome to Reboot, the new narrative, the first webinar in a series of 3 library design matters being provided via Zoom by the IFLA Library Buildings and Equipment section leading up to the virtual IFLA Congress later this year. I am Janine Schmidt. I'm in Brisbane, Australia, and together with Marion Morgan-Binden from Sydney, Australia, we are hosting today's session on behalf of IFLA's Library Buildings and Equipment section. We have almost 300 people around the world registered for the event. You can use the Twitter tag at IFLA_LBES. Our session is being recorded, and some of you may be watching it at a later stage. Thank you to IFLA for providing this version of Zoom, which includes a live transcription of what is being said. A word of warning, it's not always accurate. Artificial intelligence, as we know, is artificial at times and not always intelligent. But we hope it will help for people whose first language is not English. Life for libraries and all of us has changed dramatically with the pandemic. The future we had planned has been peremptorily pushed aside. New issues and concerns have emerged and uncertainty has befallen us. The situation around the world varies vastly. Some countries have had few cases and others are experiencing a third wave. Reactions by governments and health authorities have been diverse. Today we pose, in conversation, a series of questions focusing on library space design to 3 leaders in the library world, for all of us to gain inspiration and ideas as we forge a new path to the future. You may submit questions via the chat, and we shall attempt to deal with some today and others through follow-up. Our 3 panelists represent different parts of the world and come from different library sectors. Cathal McCauley from the academic library sector in Ireland, Carolyn Robertson from the public library sector in Christchurch in New Zealand, which has experienced the trauma of a major earthquake and terrorism in addition to the pandemic, and Ton van Vlimmeren from the Netherlands with a background in community and public libraries. Each panelist plays a role in their local environment and on a wider library stage in their regions, countries, and internationally, and all are involved in IFLA. We have all travelled uncharted paths in the last year and taken different approaches. Some libraries have remained open, some have closed, some have experienced severe financial hardship. Virtual services have replaced direct services to users. Our resilience has been sorely tried, and library staff have worked remotely from home to provide services to users they never see. The issues with which we are grappling are immense and numerous. Our webinar today focuses on the pandemic's impact on library design and space use. Let us share our experiences and learn from each other. And now for our first question to our panelists. What do you see as the primary use of library physical space in the short term and in the long term? And I'll ask Tom to speak first on this question. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Janine, and I thank all the organizers of the IFLA Building and Equipment section for the opportunity to be here with you today. Let me start by paraphrasing architect Ashok Balotra, who stated that a city is many cities, by saying a library is many libraries. In one visit, a visitor can see a documentary in the library, engage in a debate, sip a cup of coffee in a cafe, read an exclusive magazine, and then take a book out on the way home. And this way, different visitors experience different libraries. And as our collection of media grows more diverse, and people engage in more different ways of learning and informing themselves, inside the library as well as online, this trend will increase on the short and the longer term. And not all libraries are the same. In Europe, we see big landmark libraries that have become a venue, a cultural hotspot, and a tourist attraction on their own. They have theaters, cinemas, workshop, and laboratory facilities, exhibitions, one or more cafes, and are at least one of the meeting places in their community. And that has changed the use of space in libraries. 4 years ago, Carolyn Robertson and I saw what happened in then recently opened Dock 1 in Aarhus. We, both being engaged in a building process, concluded that we had to review our program of demands and allocate more space for people to connect and reside in the library, more space for programming, and less space to be occupied by a compact presented collection. And we are not at the end of this. And thanks to good acoustics, it is possible to accommodate all these functions, even in smaller libraries with open spaces. Spaces that are no longer defined in the way the program of demands made by librarians says. It is the activity and the group size, the interaction between people, and the needed technology that let us choose the space to be used and defines the function of this space for different goals and different target groups. Flexibility and movability, also of furniture and also by visitors themselves, allows for this. And in neighborhood libraries, we also see this focus on the library as a meeting place for information and education. A place to touch down at the central table near the coffee machine for those who don't know where to look for what they need. This central function is like a cocoon in the middle of the building, enveloped by flexible rooms that can be used for consultation, training, workshops and programs, by study spaces, and also enveloped by the collection at the side. And although technology is around everywhere, it is the human presence and interaction that will dominate the use of space. Thank you.
Yes, so it's the people. Cathal, your views on this question.
Thanks very much, Janine, and thanks also to the section for putting on this event. I suppose in an academic context, in the short term, study space is really key. We've learned to do so much effectively online, like events and classes and reference and so on. But the real gap is around study space and places for students to engage in online classes. While many institutions, including my own, have provided alternative space on campus but outside the library, it is clear that students have a strong preference for the library as a place to study. And I remember hearing a phrase during a fact-finding trip to the US and Canada 10 years ago when planning my own library about students wanting to be together alone in the library, even though many had on-campus accommodation and access to electronic resources was becoming very good. And I think that still holds true today, even despite the pandemic, when, they would have obviously been safer in their dorms and so on, but they still want to really come to the library. In the longer term, I think we need to refocus on the things that are hard to do well remotely, like working with unique collections and content creation spaces. I think we need to think about the things we were doing before COVID, but are hard to do well remotely, like maker spaces, digital scholarship labs, podcasting studios, audiovisual work, and other content creation spaces. In short, space that supports high value activity, I think is going to become our priority. And in terms of finding this space to create these additional for these spaces, I think areas that may shrink in the longer term will be ordinary print collections and staff areas, as more staff can work remotely, or at least differently, and possibly some training and group space, which is something I think I'll talk about a bit more later on. Thanks, Janine.
Carolyn, any final words?
I think possibly not, Janine. I think I might, there's so much that relates to what I'm going to say on the next question that I think I might wait till then. Thank you.
Right, so our next question is, what library services will be offered on-site and off-site, and how does library design feature in the delivery of those services? How does the library space respond to the new demands we're experiencing? So, Carolyn, over to you.
Thank you very much, Janine, and thank you to everyone who's been involved in putting this webinar on. It's great to be involved. I did possibly just to step back and I think echo what both Cathal and Tom have been saying. My first observation is really just that range of services offered in library spaces and through digital channels continues to expand and evolve really very rapidly, actually. When I think about what has happened just in the last few years, certainly in our Christchurch libraries, how quickly that's changing and how dynamic it is. And just some thinking too about how does library space design feature in that delivery of services, and thinking about that question. For me, it starts very much with what is our service philosophy and vision or vision for the service. Really understanding what does the community want and need from its library, what are they telling us, and bringing that together to define the customer experience or experiences, both current and aspirational. No easy task, of course, given that things are so changeable, and including the experiences of the last year. So what are we going to offer both off-site and on-site, and looking at those elements all in the most holistic way that we can. I think Tom has certainly touched on, actually both speakers have touched on the flexibility, the importance of flexibility, very much the same experience for us, and ability or potential to readily repurpose space. We've seen that very, very strongly over the last year. We saw it also in Christchurch after the earthquakes. And looking to how we can harness opportunities, big and small, both through new buildings, renovation, refurbishments, new program and technology offerings. So how do our spaces need to adapt to reflect those? What about our partnerships with other organisations, other groups, which is a really growing part of our service, and the importance of our ongoing evaluation, continual reflection about what works and what needs to change, both with the services we're offering and how our spaces are working to support those. So in Christchurch, the earthquakes were devastating, absolutely, but they were also an amazing opportunity for us. We needed to establish temporary libraries because many of our buildings were closed for long periods, and we had to do it quickly with limited funds. That forced us really to pilot new ways of working, introducing self-service technology and a roving staff model where opportunities we took, and to rethink how our services were going to be delivered. And that is expressed, I think, most strongly in Turanga, our new central library. But each time we get an opportunity to look at our spaces, our collections, our technology provision, and our customer needs, we get an opportunity to rethink. And something that I'll pick up on a little bit more later is also we're really working on that greater integration between the physical and face-to-face and digital services. So that's been important as well. Future-proofing. Yeah, sorry, that's it.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Cathal, have you anything to add to that? We've got flexible and looking at things as opportunities.
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, there's lots of things really in an academic context that we've been doing very well. One example, for example, is the whole area of in-person classes and training, particularly targeting postgraduates and faculty. I think they've always been a problem area for libraries, but because they've worked so well now online during the pandemic, I think there's going to be a shift in that model that's going to endure beyond the pandemic. Of course, one of the unknowns is whether the attendance and so on is up online because people are stuck at home, maybe they have more time. But we suspect that the flexibility of the online model is very attractive to them. The other thing I think, which as I said already, is that while the pandemic has highlighted the importance of a good study space, I think there is an interesting question around group spaces and group works, even like groups like this, like our section. I think there could be a hybrid model in the future where at key junctures groups will come together for projects and to meet, but they won't necessarily need to meet in person all the time. And that might allow for some group space to be repurposed. Another really interesting one, I think, is the whole area of events, because we certainly were bowled over by how popular the event space in our library was when we planned it in, so much so that we actually had to change our organizational structure to support the effective running of that. And we were worried about the damage that COVID was going to do to our events program. But in fact, what we've learned during the last 12 months is it's been more popular than ever. And indeed, many of our events have been more inclusive than ever, and they've been more eco-friendly because, of course, people aren't traveling, and we've had attendees from all over the world coming to events in a library virtually in Ireland that would never have attended otherwise. Now, I think it's going to be an interesting one because while it has all those advantages, some commentators think that one of the things that will happen after COVID is there's going to be some sort of a roaring 20s zeitgeist, and people are going to be eager to get out to every event and kind of celebration of humanity. And perhaps that will drive, even greater demand for events. But certainly, I think for some events, there's going to be a shift, and that might again enable some space to be freed up. But I suppose the final thing I wanted to say, and it kind of gels with what Carolyn was saying, was I think a real challenge for libraries in general, but space in particular, is we serve such a diverse range of user communities. And I think that after COVID, there's going to be more people on the spectrum, if you like, towards prepared to take services and support online. But there's always going to be many as well that will be at the other end of the spectrum and lots in between. And a challenge for library then is we're going to have to provide services and spaces that support all of our communities along that spectrum. And that's going to lead to, I think, some of these changes maybe not enabling us to free up as much space as we might think.
Well, thank you for those words of wisdom and experience, Cathal. Ton, anything to add to this question about?
Yeah, well, a lot has been said, and I will try, with the risk of running out of time, to speak slower, as I see all kind of wonderful friends asking to speak slower. I think what we learn now in this pandemic is that there doesn't need to be a sharp distinction between online and offline services, and that we already start to play with the mix between them, sometimes more digital and sometimes more on site. And we see that a lot of services can have people present and at the same time a big community online connected by image, sound and chat. And also professional equipment and studio equipment coming into libraries to do this at a well professional level. And of course, those who have the skills can always enjoy our tutorials and online classes and courses, etc. There's one aspect I like to add, and that is this pandemic has shown that kids from less favored families could not connect to online education, and that elderly citizens who were not able to use video conferencing could not connect to healthcare centers or family and others. So the digital skills and digital citizenship are not equally spread in our society, and libraries still have a big job to do in offering facilities and training to these groups. And as we used to see a movement with less computers in the library and more bring your own device, I think we now need to rethink that and keep the facilities needed to support these groups. And at the same time, we also saw that the information bubbles, the conspiracy theories and fake news raised to a level that our democracy is at stake. So I think it will be difficult for libraries to distinguish themselves online with other providers of information. but they can do so in their activities, in their physical space. So these two observations urge for a big investment in libraries, in activities like digital citizenship, computational thinking, and critical skills, and thus for the need of spaces to accommodate and support these kind of activities. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ton. And I would remind everyone to speak more slowly so that people can understand more easily. And we apologize that the transcription, which was working beautifully when we did our test, is not operating today. I suppose it's just the law, isn't it? It all works. If it works well in the rehearsal, it doesn't work well on the day. Well, with all of the issues we've dealt with, there have been some unexpected benefits of new ways of operating libraries, particularly as far as the space is concerned. So what are those? And Cathal, I'll ask you to begin on that question.
Thanks, Janine, and I'll begin as slowly as possible. I think I'm probably one of the worst offenders in that regard, so apologies to our kind delegates. Firstly, I think it's important to acknowledge that the pandemic has underlined the importance of libraries and library space, and we shouldn't take that for granted. Less than 10 years ago, when I was about to begin construction on my library, a senior member of university staff asked me sincerely, and he wasn't trying to upset me, do we really need physical library space? But now, as the pandemic is continuing in many institutions, including my own, the library is the only or one of the few buildings on campus that is providing serviced hours. And one thing I want to say about that is I think we need to consider what this means. While many academic librarians have welcomed the status of the library being open as a sign that the university is open, I'm not so sure. I think it's a mixed blessing. I think that the library is the final line of resistance in the face of COVID is dangerously close to the librarian as hero stereotype, when I would prefer to be focused on librarian as professional. I also think that libraries have invested very heavily in online content and services, and never more during the pandemic, and it devalues this investment and its hugely positive impact if the library being open is solely equated with physical space. Despite these concerns, we need to consider that I think it is a good thing that libraries, the importance of libraries has been underlined. And I just think we need to reflect on some of those other issues. I also think that the pandemic has demonstrated to the wider community, particularly academic communities, that librarians have long understood, have long been good at managing space, and libraries are well managed. And this, of course, has been very important during a time where we were dealing with issues like mask compliance, seat bookings, and quarantine materials. And students and faculty have made it very clear that even where universities have provided alternative space, they have a strong preference for well-managed space. And this management of space is in stark contrast to many spaces on campus, which are often not directly managed. Before the pandemic, because of our libraries' enthusiasm for user experience and related issues, there were some signs that librarians would take on responsibility for space beyond the library. And I think the experience of the pandemic will accelerate this trend.
Well, we're heroes and space managers. Carolyn, your take on the opportunities we've grasped.
Thank you, Janine. And I will also try and slow down. So I hope I can manage it. I want to just reflect for a moment on staff, the staff readiness to adapt spaces. I think it picks up on what Cathal was just saying about being good at managing space. Of course, we've been incredibly fortunate in New Zealand to be open and operating, relatively normally for far longer than periods than many of our counterparts in other parts of the world, for which we're very grateful. One of the elements of operating, I guess, through what we call alert levels or levels of restriction in New Zealand is being able to be flexible and quick at actually adapting our spaces and adjusting our service provision to meet those requirements. So staff have been excellent, as Cathal was saying, really at coping with the changes in the requirements that we all need to adhere to. Also, the skill development of staff, again, being willing to give everything a go, a whole lot of things a go to actually innovate, to develop those alternative offerings that can be provided through digital means has been really quite exciting to see how much staff have actually participated in that. On reopening libraries, and I think this was touched on earlier, there's been an amazing community demand. I think Cathal might have talked about the need for event space, and we're very grateful to have the event spaces that we have to offer a variety of experiences that, of course, bring people together when they can get together face-to-face again, and also through communities of interest. So we've had wonderful interest in things like our Talanoa Pacifica exhibition, our Robbie Burns night in our cafe, esports tournaments, opera productions, and Lunar New Year celebrations. And I realise when I say that how very fortunate we are to be able to have the physical gatherings, but people are really hungry for that. And just also back to staff, fantastic participation from staff when we were in lockdown, the call outs to seniors, utilising their transferable skills, their empathy and their communication skills was wonderful to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Ton, unexpected benefits.
Yeah. Thank you, Janine. Well, to follow up on Carolyn, indeed, coming from Europe, where many libraries are still restricted or even closed, we almost envy you in the possibilities you just mentioned. I think that one of the major benefits is the boost we experience in digitization of our library work and the digital skills of our staff. And many libraries now work on a full-scale digital library branch to add to their services. But as Carolyn said, the importance of the library as a house of the community was also proven by this pandemic. And it was shown in the research, I think it was in Helsinki, that people missed the connection with other people and being in the library more than the books. And that's because a public library is a public space, as it is a vehicle for and a destination of a shared need of collectivity in the community. So that is where it's all about. And not all governments have recognized already this important role of libraries, but we have seen that for some governments it was the reason to quickly reopen libraries as when it was possible, as they were considered as essential services. So let us build further on this role as a community space. And well, it will be interesting to see on the long term what the lasting effects of the pandemic on library buildings and interior design will be. For example, will social distancing lead to buildings with wider corridors and more space between the shelves, with less seats in room and turbo air circulation installations, and to deleting the concept of the office gardens for our staff? Well, we don't know that for sure, and of course there is not enough budget to change all the libraries to new kind of standards in this way. So it's in future to see what happens. Thank you.
Yes, lots of interesting ideas there. Now, throughout this time, there have been a number of personal challenges, both for library staff and for clients. So what have you seen as the personal challenges in all of this? And I'll ask Cathal to begin on this one.
Thanks, Janine. I mean, firstly, it is important to say that Ireland, as with most of Europe, as Ton has said already, has been hit very hard by the pandemic. And I suppose particularly for some of our guests and delegates joining us from elsewhere, you know, in Ireland, a small country of around 5 million people, we've had more than 230,000 cases and over 4,500 COVID-related deaths. And these numbers included library staff. And I'm going to focus on library staff, you know, when I'm answering this question. Because of the scale of the challenge in Ireland, much of 2020, we were on a war footing with naval ships acting as test centres and military paramedics assisting with patient transport and so on. And librarians were part of this response. So much so that on St. Patrick's Day, our national holiday 2020, the Taoiseach, or the Prime Minister, during his address to the nation, specifically thanked librarians for stepping up. Librarians have been deployed as contact tracers. They've used their maker spaces to make PPE. Crucially, public librarians have provided community helplines for people isolated at home. And the librarians managing those lines have had to deal with queries ranging from the straightforward to people who are physically and mentally ill, suffering domestic violence and other serious issues. And for sure, we did encounter some of these issues when we were in our libraries beforehand, but the scale and at a time when so many colleagues were suffering, it was unprecedented. And also, because of our designation as essential workers, many library staff had to go to work at a time when their family and friends did not, and when schools and creches were closed, and this caused other difficulties. To mitigate these concerns, we did a number of things. You know, we, first of all, the vast majority of staff, again, as Tana said, work from home and continue to do so. We also introduced very clear return to campus protocols that involve specific induction, health information and more. Also, staff were issued with PPE and screens and signage, and other changes were introduced. We also divided our staff into pods, with each pod being a self-contained bubble that worked set weeks. And this had the dual benefit of making staff feel safer, but also, as happened in our case when we had cases, service could continue with a pod being stood down while the outbreak was dealt with. We also have had to alter our service in line with the level of the disease, from completely closed from March to June 2020 to variations of open with reduced capacity, open for click and collect, and so on. And in addition to these steps, the government also made other changes, for example, around sick leave and so on. We've had to put a huge effort into things like employee well-being, assistance and training. And a particularly difficult area for staff during the pandemic has been the onboarding of new staff. Because I think, as we've learned now, while online is very good at maintaining and developing existing relationships, it's a poor substitute for initial rapport and value generation and so on. So I think library staff have responded very, very well to the pandemic, and we should thank them for that. I think there's going to be a massive debate now starting about remote working. In Ireland, the government has issued a white paper that aims to have at least 20% of public sector workers working from home permanently. And I think this will be a big trend in libraries. But there are a couple of things we need to consider. Firstly, a traditional response to flexible staff areas was hot desking, but post-COVID, sharing spaces like that may be less desirable. Also, I think open plan offices, which have long been the subject of debate, are going to be less desirable post-COVID. So I think staff spaces are going to have to be more attractive and supportive. And there's a possibility that even though a significant number of staff will work remotely, the space saved may not be as large as expected because of these other issues. And beyond space, then there are many other important considerations. If there's a big shift towards remote working, you know, for team dynamics and so on, I think while most people might think it's nice to work from home with their current terms and conditions, they're probably not thinking that their remote colleagues might in the future be from another country with, you know, cheaper salaries and less favourable terms and conditions. And what does that mean for the future of careers and work? While I see the advantages for both staff and the organisation, two other things that worry me about the shift to remote working is, first of all, the possibility of the loss of spontaneity and creativity. I think certain roles and certain types of work very well online, but not all. And also I worry about the creation of haves and have-nots within libraries, because for some, remote working will not be an option. And I think we've had this in the past in some cases, for example, in relation to front of house staff who've had rosters and weekend working and evening working and so on when others didn't. And this did have an impact on organisations and sometimes led to things changing, you know, people moving jobs and so on, maybe for reasons other than where their skills lay. The final thing I just want to say is that leadership has always been challenging, and it's no different after COVID, but I don't ever remember a time in 25 years working in libraries where we've had enough people and the collections we wanted and all the money we wanted. And while I think the problems with COVID are going to go on for some time, you know, our job as leaders is to focus on how we can overcome them and helping staff to prepare to overcome them as well. Thank you.
Tom, thoughts on the challenges, the personal challenges?
Well, Cathal has already said quite a lot, but we experienced, well, also the issue in staff that people living alone often felt very isolated and lonely and missed colleagues and the public. And there have been a lot of activities, from virtual coffee meetings to joint online yoga classes organized by management or by staff themselves to create links between people. Staff also had to deal with disappointment of cancelling again and again and again all kinds of programs and activities they prepared in the hope that the lockdown would be ended one day and then it was extended again. And for some, the biggest challenge was that of the visitors, the ones they normally would welcome very warm-heartedly, and now saw them as a potential source of infection, as almost a lethal risk. So we offered, and it was used by some of the colleagues, professional psychological help to work with that. Not all staff are very assertive in implementing rules, and the rules of social distancing did a higher demand on that for staff. So we had to do training on how to deal with visitors who have different opinions on social distancing. But I think that there's another side of that, and that is that most of our staff were triggered by the pandemic and became very creative in their passion to serve the community. Elderly citizens were called, and if desired, offered home delivery of books on the bikes by staff. Kids who could not connect to online learning or were offered learning environments in the library. Vlogs and tutorials were recorded, digital storytelling boosted. There were a lot of ways that show what kind of talent our staff has. And it's really the passion for the citizens that drove this. There was a high demand of leadership and communication, and despite the unknown territory, I felt we had to find a balance between creating a safe environment for our visitors and staff at the one hand, and also to stretch as much as possible the limits of our services to serve the community. Thank you.
Carolyn, any final thoughts?
Just so much resonance and similarity with what my colleagues are saying here. Just on that point that Tom's made about the strong, I'm describing as strong staff motivation or driver to meet customer needs, because that's what they're hardwired to do, which has been both wonderful in terms of the innovation and the new developments, and far more positive than negative, but is not always sustainable. So we've had to work through how we do prioritise and future-proof those new service offerings. That is not a bad thing. It's a really great opportunity, but I think it happened very quickly and probably in quite an organic way. I think everything probably, I would just echo really what has been said from the staff point of view, and touching on that point that Tom made too about the difficulty that our staff have to act in a more enforcer kind of role with the public. That has certainly presented challenges. It's fabulous that we're open. It's fabulous that our customers want to visit, but for some people, they have resented the requirements that are imposed by the government. And so that puts our staff in a difficult position. For customers, I think it's just, again, highlighting that loss of social connection and contact with others outside their homes when libraries close their door has a very big impact on the community. And within the libraries, when we're open, because of social distancing and other requirements, there's less ability for staff and customers to be working side by side. So the barriers of desks and screens that we wouldn't normally use have had to go back into place. But we always work to find a way around that. And I think that's probably all I need to say. Thank you.
Yes, well, we've learned to expect the unexpected. If you were to summarise in one sentence your learnings so far of new ways of designing library spaces and services during a pandemic, what would that be? I'll start with Cathal.
Thanks, Janine. Sorry, I was on mute. We weren't going to get through the whole meeting without someone saying that. Well, I suppose I have to return to flexibility that Ton and Carolyn have touched on already. But just to stick to, you know, Eleanor Roosevelt, that great supporter of libraries, had a great quote, which is, "Be flexible but stick to our principles." And I think that's going to be good advice for our approach. And our principles of customer service and accessibility and inclusivity and education, innovation should continue to inform our design of our spaces. But flexibility is going to be really important, even more so, because if the pandemic has shown anything, it's that no one knows what the future holds and what demand is going to place in our services, and we have to be flexible and adaptive. Two other things I just want to throw in at the very end, I guess, is I think there's going to be an increased focus on green design, eco-friendly design, and also, as I said earlier, on high value services in our spaces, because they're going to become so important. Thanks, Janine.
Thank you. Ton, one sentence summary?
Well, not in one sentence, but you might have noticed I strongly believe in the social role of the library as a house of the community, serving values as democracy and inclusiveness, access to real information, and as a place of learning. And the pandemic, and to mention some other thing, the elections in the USA, for example, have shown us how far apart the realities of groups of people nowadays are. And that makes it difficult to work on these values. And we need to connect to citizens of all walks of life in the library. So our libraries should be inviting places on the outside as well as on the inside for all of these groups. And I believe that in order to be able to do that, library design is not only a matter of the collaboration or sometimes the battle between the architect and the librarian in creating this building, but it should also be, like Nina Simon says, something you do with the citizens and ask what kind of services they are seeking and what kind of building that would require. Probably more for the neighborhood libraries than for the big landmark libraries. I'm not sure about that. One thing I would change based on this pandemic is that as visitors have to circulate through the building, I would make sure that every of our libraries would have a good separate entrance and an exit at the other side of the building to make sure that we can deal with the next pandemic. Thank you.
A very interesting point about entry and exit. Thank you, Ton. Carolyn.
Thank you. And just on that point, that is something that we did design with Turanga, our central library, and we've been very, very grateful every time we've had to change our alert levels to actually be able to channel people in a safe and appropriate way and ensure that our contact tracing, etc., is done. So that's great. The point that Ton picked up as well, just about that really understanding our customer needs and whether it's more community or central libraries. Two points there. For us, it was a very important part of our design. The design thinking for Turanga was to really understand and hear from the community and to ensure that our architects and other consultants really heard that loud and clear as well. So I think that's been very instrumental in shaping the thinking, or was, in shaping the thinking of how our spaces would be developed and what would be prioritised. And post that period of opening the library, but pre-pandemic, we've really been working to increase our understanding and capabilities around co-design so that we can work more effectively with our customers, with our community in service development and also around space planning. So that's an ongoing journey. I just want to echo really again what Tom was saying about the values, the vital role that libraries play in tough times. Never has that been more emphasised, as we've all been saying, as trusted and welcoming public spaces, a familiar refuge or haven, and the importance of being able to learn together, connect with each other and develop our skills and our capability for this challenging future. So I think that willingness to adapt and change and evolve is just going to be continuing. And as we've also said, that seeing that blended service between offering the face-to-face and the digital alongside each other, or being able to substitute the face-to-face with the digital offerings, it's very much normalised, I think, in part of our direction now. And where it will take us, who will know? But it's an interesting time. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, during our session, quite a lot of very interesting questions have come through on the chat, and I'm going to hand over to Marion to manage this part of our process today.
Thank you, Janine. There's a number of common threads. One is around flexibility, and one is around the combination of space and distinguishing between a digital and the physical presence. And if I could just throw to the first question, which is around, does the need and the importance of flexibility lead to the development of bland spaces? And how do we actually influence those flexible spaces so they are not bland? Ton, I think, is one of the newest libraries. Could I start with you?
Well, thank you, Marianne. I'm not sure I'm familiar with the word bland.
Dull.
Dull. Oh, okay.
Dull. Dull. And I know your library all of your libraries are anything but that.
Well, I think that it depends on what you consider as created forever and unmovable, and how flexible you want to be. So, for example, in Node Library in Utrecht, we experienced in the main hall, which we use for a lot of traditional library roles, like being our newspaper reading room, etc. That also can be a venue for concerts. There was a big digital exhibition during the movie festival, the Dutch Movie Festival. There can be talk shows, there can be exhibitions. So it's really a space that is used in all kinds of flexible ways, but also to a certain extent at the price that when it's a big thing in that hall, the newspapers had to be moved to some other place to be accessible for our visitors. So I think that is what is in your mindset. If your shelving is not on wheels, as we fortunately see in many libraries, at least partly, then it becomes more difficult. So I would invite you to take different sets of glasses and look at your library and think of it as an event place, as a meeting place for youngsters, as an exhibition place, and see how you can deal with the space then.
Thank you, Ton. Carol, there's a lot of interest in the division of the two main wants of an academic library, the quiet space and the study space, and how you actually merge or how you actually deliver those spaces.
Okay, and I think I can connect it as well to the discussion on flexibility, because I think it's a really interesting one, because I think there's a tension post-COVID around flexibility. It's important in the sense that we need to be able to respond to the unknown, and COVID, very few people foresaw it, or certainly its impact. But also flexibility, in some sense, has been seen as a bad thing because of COVID, because we don't want people moving furniture, we don't want people going closer together and so on. All the things that we wanted to encourage for so long. So I think there's going to be two things, there's going to be flexibility maybe around equipment and services and so on, with maybe sometimes less flexibility around seating and so on, where we want to be sure that we can say, if there's a problem, that we know where someone sat. And this leads to, I suppose, the other issue, which is, yes, I think there is going to be increased demand for that kind of, as I said, study space, and that's going to continue. But the way in which we deliver it, I think, is going to have to be reviewed. So some of the, very large open plan approaches that we took to providing that space have now been shown to be maybe less desirable, certainly for some people. So I think it's going to force us to think about how we deliver that kind of service, and it is, I think, in some cases going to lead to less efficiency of service. So we were a big thing in academic libraries was getting as many people in as possible, and that is going to have to be reviewed, and that is certainly going to be a significant challenge because despite COVID and all these other pressures, certainly in Ireland, the numbers of people seeking to go to university, just this year, we just have closed our annual applications out for 2021, and we've had record numbers. So even though the student experience hasn't been what you might, what we would like it to be in the past year, there's no sign of demand tapering off. So there's going to be real tension there, I think, in terms of design.
Thank you. If I could just throw to Carolyn for the next, there's a lot of comment in the chat on your comments around the digital library being visible in the physical space. And Ton, you mentioned this in the need for civic democracy as well. But Carolyn, could you speak to that first? It was making the digital library much more visible in your physical space.
Yes, it's both that. Thank you, Marion. Both that and I think a digital equivalent to the physical experience was what I was referring to. But if we think about the digital being present in the physical space, we are some of the ways that we've been expressing that are through digital exhibitions or digital offerings in physical exhibitions and physical presentations of our digital heritage material. We had the opportunity when we created Open Turanga to have what we call our discovery wall, which is a very large digital wall in a very high value area on our ground floor, which provides the opportunity to actually showcase our digital heritage collections. So that was something that it's not a new idea, of course, and will be replaced, I'm sure, by other iterations. But that's been a very good way of actually really making available those wonderful resources that we have digitised. In our exhibitions, in our curated exhibitions, again, we have that opportunity with an exhibition space in Turanga, having digital material available alongside the physical artefacts and objects. And in terms of programming, I think it's really about having the digital being able to, both when our library doors are closed, being able to offer as many programs and services as we can, the ones that we know are high value, to have the digital offering to do a lot of videoing, I think has been touched on as well, and to have activities and activities that families can engage in around some of our key events. So that's not new, of course, many libraries are doing that. I think it's been about the scale of the amount that we're doing and some of the new offerings, really ensuring that we can replace the face-to-face or augment the face-to-face with digital services.
Thank you. In the interests of time, we're almost run out, but there's a question for all the participants, which Ton, you answered without prompting. If you were to change one thing to your current design based on the experience this year, what would that be?
Well, I mentioned the entrance and exit already. I would say that I would review also the neighborhood libraries more to serve the public in a proper way, because they are smaller, so they have less possibilities in a world of social distancing, and at the same time they are so important for the basics of our library work.
Thank you. Cathal?
Yeah, it's a really good one. I think we would certainly like to have had more routes up and down and through the building, because one of the things we had to do in Ireland, I think in many other countries, was introduce one-way systems and so on. And actually, because of the way the building was designed, it's one of these funny tensions between green ambitions and other ambitions. We only had one entrance and one lift and one large stairwell, which looks beautiful, of course, and means the building is sealed and it makes the natural air ventilation so on work very well. But in a time of COVID, then when you're trying to manage traffic, it really, really was challenging.
Thank you. And Carolyn?
I think really the most significant thing for us would be around what Tom was saying before about some of our smaller community libraries. Yes, maintaining social distancing requirements and check-in requirements, very, very challenging in those spaces. So often they are older buildings. We've certainly repurposed or changed layout and reduced physical collections and done a variety of things over the years to prioritise that public space and flexible space. But it is challenging in much smaller buildings. So I think we would also, it would be good to look at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Janine. I'll throw back to you.
Well, thank you very much to our panellists for their insight today, and to Diane Cohen, who's been handling our technical support in Montreal, and to others involved, particularly from IFLA with Megan Price, for their technical assistance. We feel encouraged as we go forward. We are not alone. Across the world, libraries are experiencing similar issues. Sharing our knowledge and learning from each other is what IFLA is all about. Flexibility appears to be more important than ever, not only in library design features, furniture and fittings, but also in our thinking. We encourage each of you to follow the activities of the Library Buildings and Information section through the IFLA website, our Facebook page, our blog, our Twitter feed, and the recording of the session on YouTube. There are 400 who registered, almost 400 who registered for today, and almost 200 have participated today. We know it's being held in times that are not suitable for all, and we shall include some of the additional questions as we go back so that everyone can be involved. The Library Buildings and Equipment section will be providing a second webinar in our series, Library Design Matters. Library Design Matters 2, Outdoor Spaces are Key Library Assets. Thank you again to our panelists and technical support, and to each one of you for participating in the section. See you again on May the 6th, 2021. Thank you, everyone.